Hello, and welcome to today's webinar as part of the Next Innovation series. Today's topic will be a discussion about virtual strategies for successfully reaching audiences. My name is Angela Labrozzi. I'm the Channel Partner Director here at Within3. Today, I am joined by two panelists, Nichola and Jared. Would you both mind sharing a little bit about your background and introduce yourselves?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for inviting me to participate today, Angela. My name is Nichola Gokool, and I am a Senior Director for Customer Strategy within the Parexel Medical Communications Group. I've been in Parexel for just over 8 years and been in the healthcare industry for many, many more than that, working on a broad range of engagement and communication solutions. I'm really delighted to join the panel today.
Great, thanks.
Thank you very much, Angela. Lovely to be a part of this panel today with Nichola as well. I'm an account lead at medicalwriters.com. We're a medical communications agency, and yeah, we partner with clients to deliver medical communications and medical education with purpose, the HCPs. And we've always looked to set the pace in this area, especially leveraging digital concepts. So it's certainly a really interesting topic today. So thank you very much for the invitation.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you both for joining us. For today's agenda, we're going to delve into looking exactly at, what virtual engagement is. We're hearing that term thrown around a lot now. And for anybody joining us, whether you are on the client side for a pharma or device company, or perhaps with an agency, we're going to talk about different strategies related to that. And then we'll have a nice discussion with both of our panelists, really talking about some of their experiences within the past year, some of their successes, looking at some case studies. And then our hope is that you'll be able to walk away from today's discussion with some real actionable next steps, some recommendations as you're working on your strategic planning. We found this topic, quite timely as we're nearing the end of the year and we're looking at 2021 plans. And really taking a look now, knowing that live events are really going to be very different, if non-existent, for a good portion of the year. So I'd like to just start off by talking about virtual engagement. And as I mentioned, I do work for Within3, and we are a life science software company. And we've really looked for areas in the communications industry where communication plans could be complicated or time-consuming and expensive. And so we've really tried to develop a technology solution that can help provide a solution for these challenges. So, as we all know, we went from live meetings and having to shift very quickly earlier this year to bringing things online. And I think a lot of us immediately thought of different interactive forums and webcasts to get that done. But there are other tools that we can use, such as overtime asynchronous platforms like Within3's platform, that allows your audiences to communicate with each other in an overtime setting. So I know a lot of us, both in our personal and professional lives, are seeing opportunities to use overtime settings like this. We're seeing it, asynchronous. We're throwing that term around for our children in school. So this is really a great way that we're now able to open the door to different audiences, whether they're patients or HCPs. And so that's what we're talking about when we're looking at an overtime meeting. It's just that ability to cut down the barriers of time zones, languages, and offering people 24/7 access to be able to communicate with each other. And this, as a marketer, both on the agency side as well as if you are at a pharma or device company, really opens the ability for you to expand your network and really be able to receive rich, deep engagement that maybe even in a live setting you may have not received before, but at least it gives you some flexibility, especially as you are planning for next year. And in so many cases, a lot of the examples that we're going to be talking about today may span the drug life cycle. So anywhere between clinical, medical affairs, or commercial. Any of these tools that we'll discuss today could really be applicable in a number of different areas. So whether it is that direct engagement, whether you're looking feedback for publication development or perhaps even commercial materials, there's really a wide breadth, and really it's a great opportunity as marketers to really become creative and how you can reach audiences differently. So, we're going to delve into our discussion and really taking a look at that asynchronous opportunity as well as live meetings, and maybe even considering a hybrid approach. Perhaps you do have some portions of your discussion that occur asynchronously through a platform, and then maybe you are still conducting a live meeting, whether it's through Zoom or GoToWebinar, a number of the systems that are out there that can allow your advisors to really network and connect with each other face to face. And then you can continue that conversation offline. So there are just a number of different ways. And so I'm excited to start our discussion and really look at some of these tools and find out how both of you have been successful at doing so. So I'm just going to jump back. I thought maybe we could start our discussion by looking at maybe some examples that both of you could share, their 1 to 2 examples from this past year.
Yeah, absolutely. Perhaps I'll go first then. So I've got an example with using a virtual meeting with an overtime element actually to engage with our patient advisory council that we have within Parexel. So traditionally we've conducted these as face-to-face meetings, and very quickly early on in the pandemic we obviously had to pivot to more of a virtual method of interaction with our patient advisors, which we were very nervous about, I have to say. And so what we did was used an element of the overtime meeting format in advance of the meeting to collate information, to share pre-read materials with our patient advisors, and also to obtain feedback on discussion topics. And then we use that feedback to help us to tailor and draft our actual agenda, which we then had for our virtual meeting format. And what we found was this allowed us to use the time much more effectively in that virtual meeting setting. So rather than having an undefined agenda or too many discussion topics, we were actually able to drill down in terms of what were the most important items we needed to delve a little bit further in that actual meeting environment. So that overtime element really helped to fine tune the process and the content that we had for the main meeting. I think when we transitioned to this new approach from the face-to-face, as I said, we were very concerned actually about the level of interaction and engagement with our patient advisors and whether they would still feel that their voice was being heard. And actually we found the opposite, actually, that they found it to be incredibly effective. Collating those insights up front in that overtime environment was really, really helpful to ensure that we had a focused discussion. We were able to ensure that every person had the opportunity to speak and that their voice could be heard. And we've conducted a number of these over the last 6 to 8 months or so. And at the end of each activity, each event, we do capture feedback from our patient advisors, and I just checked back on the results actually that we've collated for the last couple, and we found that 100% of our advisors across approximately 5 meetings felt that their opinions were respected, they felt welcomed and included as a member of the group, and most importantly actually they felt that their participation was worthwhile. And then we have softer feedback as well, in terms they actually preferred the meeting format because they didn't need to travel. They didn't need to go away from their home, from their family, their caregivers. So actually this provides a different level of comfort, but still allows them to interact with us as a pharma industry as well.
That's terrific. That's a really great example, and so many considerations for patients, and probably I would foresee moving forward, this may really affect how we handle our patient engagement.
Yeah, so Nichola, I must say that our experience has been very similar in that regard, whereby having that asynchronous session more up front is really, it's been really pivotal in getting and extracting the most value out of the live sessions, if you will. And you spoke about these patient advisory boards, and we certainly saw that with the healthcare professional advisory board level as well. We know that these are really highly sought after activities. From these meetings you get to understand the voice of the clinical community, and time is certainly one of those commodities and currencies that is certainly very difficult to get a hold of and respect for these advisors and experts. Now, having that pre-meeting survey or pre-meeting material has also been really useful for us in terms of thinking about an agenda in advance, getting, let's say, insights in earlier to shape a little bit more of the discussion, so that you get rid of this baseline time where you're really setting the scene for everyone. Everyone has the scene set up if you start earlier on, and it just allows for a little bit more of a targeted insight session, and it's almost that second point of contact where you can leverage what was said prior, and it was certainly a really good experience of ours as well. So I think you've got the nail on the head there. The other thing that we've really seen successful from an asynchronous live overtime type of event, if you will, we just completed a standalone educational research week, and this was an annual type of engagement that one of our key clients really ran every year. And primary to the goal was having excellent scientific exchange that was really facilitated between the client and global researchers and clinical scientists. And in the past, this was really tagged on as a face-to-face type of event. Now, moving this forward into the era of a pandemic, scientific exchange still needs to happen. It's just, how do we now facilitate that? And so what we've done this year for that particular event was had a bit of a think about, well, what has the pandemic taught us in terms of virtual events? We really learned that there was a bit of fatigue, digital fatigue, from all of the online events that were happening, all of the virtual events that were kind of being scheduled one after the other. And so with this week-long scientific exchange event, we also utilized a platform to have on-demand content that was there available for the participants if they weren't able to dial into one particular day for whatever reason. And I think given these uncertain times when a med call might happen, you can't guarantee your audience always being there at the allotted slot that you planned for. So giving them the option of actually digesting that content or engaging with it on their own time has been really successful for us.
That's terrific. Those are great examples. And I think, it's worth really thinking about, especially with the live events. So many, whether it's, HCPs, nurses, they're still working professionals. So they've still got a schedule to keep. Are you finding, especially now, knowing I know you're both located in Europe and here in the US, we're certainly on the brink of day-to-day, how are each state going to handle any sort of lockdown or restrictions? Are you seeing any considerations for that as you are planning, at least for the first quarter, of any changes to your strategies related to that and how to reach those particular types of audiences?
Yeah, I think certainly for the first part of next year into the end of Q2, we're certainly anticipating virtual engagements to be the norm with no face-to-face interaction whatsoever. Obviously, that may well change and extend later into 2021. I think that will really vary country by country, dependent on what happens with vaccine rollout and changes in different regions and different countries. As you say, Andrew, it varies from Europe to the US, but I think certainly seeing, and the planning that we started with our clients is certainly all virtual up until the end of Q2, and then we might start to see a move possibly to some sort of hybrid model to be defined. And then if we are to go back to any degree of face-to-face, I think that would be much later into 2021, with very considered rationale for why you need to bring individuals together. I think, and you both mentioned it, we're bringing together either healthcare professionals or patients. And when we're talking about healthcare professionals, they have a day job to do right now under immense pressure, and that has to be the absolute priority. So any event that we're asking, or any time we're asking them to take away from their patients, we need to be really mindful of how are we using that time most effectively. So one of the questions that we're certainly starting to ask ourselves now is, what's the best way to achieve those desired outcomes? What are we asking for those those key opinion leaders, those healthcare professionals. What does that good outcome look like? How can we achieve that? Does it have to be face-to-face? At the moment it can't be, but it doesn't have to be, and even when it can, we can start to think about it. Could we achieve those same outcomes through another delivery format, be that an overtime format, some sort of virtual meeting, some sort of hybrid? And I think we have to be much more mindful of those, taking into account the demands that we might be putting onto those healthcare professionals and where their priority needs to be now and in the long-term future as well, and that is providing patient care and being available for their patients. And then certainly the idea of asking them to travel with the idea they may then have to quarantine when they come back, I think that would be an absolute no right now. And so I think that's certainly at the forefront of our mind as we move forward, is real careful consideration, understanding the objectives, and then determining your meeting approach once you've reviewed those and asked yourself those key questions.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there, Nichola. I think the purpose of why we're engaging with these patients or healthcare professionals, it really has to be thought about in advance, and there shouldn't necessarily be this knee-jerk reaction that we had this event, it was planned, let's just turn it virtual. That's certainly not the way that the smarter clients are going about it, but rather what is the actual purpose and intent of the meeting, and what are the actual ways to go and achieve that and get those insights or get that engagement. I'd say, Angela, that's probably what we're seeing as well. It's not necessarily a knee-jerk switch everything to virtual and go forward.
Absolutely. Now, what are some of the conversations happening around congresses for next year? Certainly, I think all of the Congress planners are looking at virtual opportunities, and certainly they're having to shift, all of the usual areas that companies would be supporting. So whether it's the symposia, abstracts and posters, the good old exhibit hall, which I think we're all still navigating best practices, if there is some for virtual exhibit halls. So I'd love to hear, what are those conversations looking like, and what are you seeing people may, approach conferences? Maybe will they scale back? Do you think they're still going to budget for the same amount?
I can go first, Nichola. So as Nichola kind of said beforehand, we are really preparing for a first half of 2021 whereby everything's really virtual. Mm-hmm. And some of the congresses that we are already targeting and preparing for, they've already announced that they're going virtual. Mm-hmm. Some of them are even through halfway through the year. So it's more or less set. Now, the ones that are happening in Q3, Q4, it's a little bit of a wait and see kind of game. But what we found this year was that in response to the pandemic, something had to change pretty quick. And so the congresses really had to think on their feet and really sidestep everything to get the entire meeting underway, just to happen from a logistics perspective. Mm-hmm. And so everything from the technological capability to the meeting concept to compliance processes as well, these things were really, I feel like everyone was really wading their way through this, trying to find the best way to go about it and navigate it. I'm looking forward to what 2021 brings, now that we know what situation we're in. We know that 2021 is going to be a year of mostly virtual congresses. And I think understanding that is going to be a really key factor for planning for 2021. And so that's what we're seeing with our clients, that there is this aspect of how is this thing going to run, and what are the different compliance processes that we've got to really be aware of, given that this doesn't take place on, the soil of a particular country. This takes place virtually. So what does that actually mean, and how do you navigate those compliance, those hurdles? Otherwise, we have found that pre-recorded and produced content is now also becoming a bit of a norm, given that we need content that is on demand. It lives a bit longer. It's more accessible. From a content production perspective, that's more or less what we're seeing. And from a booth and exhibit hall perspective, I think everyone agrees that they miss a little bit of that buzz when you walk into an exhibit hall and you see, you know, thousands of people, and it's a really exciting kind of event. Unfortunately, I think you lose a little bit of that during the virtual experience, dialing in from home. But I don't know, we haven't necessarily found that this has been a particularly attractive option for many of our clients in terms of having booths and that kind of thing. I don't know, Nichola, have you seen that type of behavior or thinking in your...
Agree with you. I think we've seen very, very similar thought process, similar patterns as well from our clients. So to your point, first of all, about the planning for next year for congresses, as you say, most of them are virtual until June, and there are some that are planning face-to-face latter part of next year, but we have seen some end of June, even this week, actually one that we were planning to go face-to-face. They've announced that's now been moved virtual, so I suspect we'll start to see more and more changing in the next month or so. In terms of those interactions, I think, Jared, you're absolutely right, and Angela as well, that congresses in the past have presented this absolutely brilliant networking opportunity. So it was more than just the data, perhaps. It was the opportunity to network with your peers, hear perspectives, gain information from colleagues, etc. So we're losing all of that at the moment, unfortunately, in the virtual world. We're also losing those opportunities for our clients to interact with healthcare professionals, both from in a symposium hall, physically in the room, one-to-one meetings, smaller educational meetings that would have happened around the Congress, obviously within the compliance restrictions of the particular Congress. So all of that has gone now. So we're having to think quite cleverly about how we do that and how we navigate that. The booth, to your point, Jared, is a whole other area, and having an amazing big Congress booth was obviously a big draw. We can't replicate that to the same degree on a virtual setting, and I think we're seeing now from our clients' perspectives what's the best way to spend that budget now to make sure I can have a meaningful interaction with the healthcare professionals, to ensure that I can share and communicate my data and disseminate my data and my information in the most appropriate manner. So we focus a lot on medical publications, so we're doing a lot of work with our clients now about how we can support that data dissemination from a Congress perspective. So looking at taking the Congress poster and really pushing how you can extend the reach of that Congress poster through digital enhancements, etc. And I suspect they will become a stronger vehicle initially until we can transition back to something that's similar to normal, but I'm not sure. I can't foresee us going back to the likes of the big 20,000 Congress attendees, certainly in the short term. So I think we're going to have to navigate in the next 6 to 12 months the best way and the most effective way to communicate with healthcare professionals. And it may be some of the items we're talking about here, so perhaps pre-recorded sessions, other smaller meetings, because I think that's the bit that's really missing for me, as well as that networking, sharing opinions, sharing perspectives has gone. So I'd like to hope we can start to bring some of those into the mix as we move into the early part of next year.
Well, I love that idea, though, about, creating new materials. I guess as a benefit that's maybe launching from this is that idea of taking the same amount of content, and certainly as we're, developing content that certainly we're putting a lot of time and money behind, to be able to give it additional legs and additional reach is really worthwhile. And I think that's a really great takeaway for anybody listening in, to really start to become creative and think about that it doesn't need to be a one and done at a meeting, that there's a lot of different channels that you could work with the content. So no, that's terrific. Along those same lines, would love to chat about, KOL reach, and certainly we're talking about, reaching different audiences. So I'd love to, pick your brains about any of your clients that are any them using this as an opportunity to maybe reach out beyond their normal, 20, 30 advisors, and even taking into consideration smaller companies. If you're seeing maybe this is leveling the playing field, if any of them are maybe able to obtain KOLs they weren't able to talk to before, or maybe they're reaching additional audiences beyond, HCPs and patients. Maybe they are reaching nurses or payers. Just wondering if you could, comment on how those discussions are going.
Yeah, I think it's definitely opening up the interactions and changing how we can engage with, be it the top key opinion leaders or local experts, etc. And perhaps in the past, when you were asking an expert to travel to a face-to-face meeting, that might have been a barrier, that might have limited attendance. So I think what we certainly seen is that flexibility of having a virtual forum, whatever that format might be, seems in a lot of instances more accommodating, more flexible and more attractive to a key opinion leader. So I think that's where we're seeing that change, is that it's allowed us to broaden that reach, open up opportunities where perhaps an advisor may have said, I'm sorry, no, that's not possible because of my clinical commitments. And Indra, I'll tell you an interesting story. We were conducting a virtual meeting a couple of weeks ago, and we had a couple of surgeons on the line. Now, in the past, they would have absolutely not been able to join that type of interaction because their clinical priorities take preference. But because it was a virtual meeting, they were literally able to finish their work, jumped straight onto the phone, and they joined us in their scrubs. So that type of opportunity would not have been possible in the past. So I think having this flexibility that they can still do what's important, which is care for patients, and then still provide that guidance and advice to support us, but they can do both much more easily. And we've been certainly much more accommodating and flexible with meeting start times, and then providing some of this pre-work offline, so to speak, in that overtime format, and allows a much bigger degree of flexibility. And I think that's helped to increase partnerships across the board.
That's terrific. That's a great example, especially those hospital-based physicians. They're, of course, always some of the hardest to reach. So to be able to have that access.
Absolutely. It almost begs the question, why didn't we do this all before? No, so I would also echo Nicola's sentiments there. What I would also say is that in terms of the KOL type of landscape, these opinion leaders build their reputation over time. And so within the space of a year, your main KOLs are going to also remain realistically the main KOLs. It takes a little bit more time for that landscape to really shift and change. So from a KOL shift perspective, we haven't seen that too much, but certainly that access capability that Nichola touched on there as well. I think the intention from the KOLs is certainly there. It's just more that accessibility piece. Another consideration is that I touched on it before, but you can't necessarily guarantee the attendance of a lot of the KOLs for particular meetings, and that's why that asynchronous level of overtime work kind of covers up those gaps, whereby maybe an emergency comes up, or something they need to be pulled out of a meeting to go actually rush into surgery. I think we've become more considerate of how to facilitate KOLs joining virtual events, and so the whole user experience aspect is something that we've seen change dramatically, giving them that opportunity to join.
That's terrific. Yeah, no, that's great. And I love the idea that we're now opening some of these types of opportunities. And even on the flip side, attendees, are reporting that they're now able to even attend meetings that maybe they weren't before, whether it was due to scheduling or travel restrictions. Anecdotally, I spoke with a cardiologist the other day who said, I got to hear somebody speak. It was a professor I had in college. I hadn't heard from them in over 10 years. And this was a wonderful opportunity that otherwise in normal times I probably would have never gone to this meeting. So I think there are some opportunities and benefits stemming from this. Wanted to speak about these kinds of success metrics and wondering, as both of you are, working on strategic plans and speaking with clients, how are some of these success metrics changing? Because certainly, when it comes to looking at live congresses, we were looking at how many bodies we had in the seats, how many people attended our symposia, how many people came to the booth. So just curious how those conversations are shifting, if at all.
They absolutely are. And I think you've hit the nail on the head there, Angela. We've shifted away, and actually we'd already started to do this pre the pandemic. We'd started to shift away from these traditional metrics of number of attendees, and we've certainly started to look at more the value of that interaction. So what's the level of the interaction from the attendees throughout that engagement? So if it's a virtual meeting, are they maintaining that engagement throughout the meeting? So that might be through measures such as the number of individuals that are commenting, responding to polling questions, those sorts of things. And then what's really important for us as well is looking at direct feedback from the attendees on their actual experience of the meeting, because it's been such a shift from face to face, and we know people have really been struggling with that lack of physical contact, and we know why people went to face-to-face meetings for that networking element and having the ability to interact and speak. So some of our measures that we're seeing now shifting is actually looking at, did they feel that the meeting was engaging, interactive? Was it a valuable use of their time as well? And I think that's a really, really important metric right now, because certainly in the healthcare professional community, as we've talked about already today, there's this huge time pressure, and their priority is seeing their patients. So we're drawing them away from that. So we want to make sure that they feel that that time was well spent. So we're certainly using that as a metric now as well. And then certainly from our patient perspective, which is, we've done a lot, as I said, a number of patient meetings. For us, it's about, did they feel that their voice was heard and that their opinions were respected and valued? So those are the types of questions. So they're not your hardcore metrics perhaps that we would have looked at in the past, but I think in this changing virtual environment, they're becoming incredibly important as well to track and monitor after each event. So Jared, I don't know whether you've got similar experiences or different ideas.
No, very, very much in the same vein. I think that whole user experience aspect is certainly something that is coming to the fray a lot. There's so many different platforms out there. There's so many different ways of reaching an audience. Ultimately, people are going to go for the path of least resistance to actually engage with the content. So being really mindful of that is certainly a metric. Number of people registered versus actually attending, or number of people invited versus actually being able to register and then attend. It's certainly been along those lines, as well as what you have said, Nichola. I think the key here is just really touching base in with the audience and understanding what they're feeling, how they have really found the experience, what value has been added. I love that question, Nichola. It's spot on. And then just continuously improving that, and kind of having that mentality of, okay, this is great this time, but let's go for, let's target that for the next time. And I think we're all learning, and I think we're all looking to get better and better at these things. And the more that we listen to the audiences that we're engaging with, the more that we can certainly make it a much more valuable experience for them.
I love that idea of value of time and really making it worth people's time to be there and to participate. One of the things that we talk about in an overtime setting is that it really gives people an equal voice, that attendees aren't showing up and you've got one or two dominant voices in a room, that everybody's voices are just as equal, and that you really are having a nice dialogue and discussion amongst clinicians or amongst whoever the participants are in a virtual setting. So I think that's really key, and a great recommendation for anybody listening in to really take that into consideration as they're looking at plans and really factoring in, we want to be sensitive to people's time, whether they are patients or HCPs, and really taking that into consideration. So that's a really good point.
Yeah, and
was also even going to, oh, sorry.
No, sorry, I was just going to add on to that. I think based on those asynchronous sessions and share of voice that both of you really touched upon, we found that doing that type of activity, pre-meeting, has allowed us to recognize the voice of people that may not have really been heard during a particular advisory board, for example. If you see something pre-meeting, you can kind of identify that as a discussion point during the meeting, and where an advisor may not have been so vocal at a face-to-face, or a largely, not necessarily unplanned, but with their advice that was not necessarily digested in advance, it gives you that opportunity to give those advisors or give those patients a little bit more of a voice during the live event as well. And we found that as a really successful method of, having an equal share of voice, and not just having the loudest person in the room, dominate the airtime.
No, I love that. And now you're starting to cultivate an even more engaged audience, right? Maybe people that you hadn't engaged before, but to Nichola's point, kind of that quality over quantity, and having some people that can really speak for your clients, or maybe want to be engaged that maybe you weren't engaging before, can sometimes really speak volumes. Yeah, no, that's terrific. I like that idea a lot. In terms of timing, was just curious, and we talked about this a little bit earlier in the discussion in terms of logistics and planning, but how are you seeing timelines shift in terms of your planning for next year? Is this able, using virtual tools, now that you're not having to have, logistics involved and travel restricted times, even just finding a date to coordinate could have taken a month or two. So I was just curious if you could comment on, how those timelines are shifting.
I think from my perspective, we've been able to bring meetings forward and do things much quicker, perhaps, than if you had to schedule a face-to-face meeting to coordinate calendars sometimes, or find a date that works. You then got to book a venue, and you need a lead time to be able to do that. So certainly some of the meetings that we've been organising, we can organise them in a much quicker time frame perhaps than we've done before. And back to that point about being accommodating and flexible, if it's just a 3 to 4 hour window that you're asking for somebody to fit in, they can accommodate that round other things. So I think we're able to bring these meetings forward, and we've got quicker actually. So some of the patient advisory meetings that I've been involved in recently, because we know the model we're using now, we can certainly prepare them, plan them much more quickly and much more effectively, because we've got a process in place now. So I think we're seeing them shortened. Obviously, it depends on the type of meeting. If it's a large meeting where we're bringing together large groups of individuals, you still need to be mindful of allowing them time to block that particular date, hour, 2 hours in their calendar. So I think adequate notice is still important, but some of that planning element can be done much more efficiently and quicker, I would think, versus what we've done previously from a face-to-face perspective.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Seeing that as well. Yeah, at least from an organisation, meeting event and organisation perspective, that's certainly the case. From a content production perspective, we're also seeing that with interactions with congresses, when you're developing symposia, or when you're developing product theatres or anything around that type of content, we're seeing actually the timelines brought forward. So prior, you would have an event, for a particular day, whether it be a symposium or product theatre or whatever it may be, and you'd really have up until that event to finalise the content, get all of your compliance approvals done, do the rehearsals and so forth. But now a lot of the symposia, a lot of the forum talks, a lot of the product theatres, they are going more pre-recorded. And so you need to have a very good understanding of when the deadlines for the different congresses are, because if a congress happens, argument's sake, in July, you might actually need to submit all your content by early June. And what does that mean for the whole content development process? It gets, it gets moved much earlier. So it's a good idea to not be caught out by that.
I'd just say as well, don't underestimate the planning that needs to go into these types of meetings. I think we've had experiences in the past when we transitioned to virtual, certainly in the early days, that anybody thought you could run a virtual engagement, a virtual meeting. So anybody who'd ever had a WebEx account thought, oh, I'm equipped to do this. That is not the case, and we've had some fairly bad examples, I would say, where, and we've learned, and our clients, should I say, have learned as well, that there does need to be some real careful planning and consideration that happens from a virtual meeting. And actually, I would say sometimes the amount of effort and time you need to put into that planning stage is higher than you would for a face-to-face interaction, because you've got to think really carefully about, what am I doing pre-meeting? How am I drafting the agenda? How am I structuring any of those virtual interactions and virtual activities? How am I ensuring I get the best out of that time? How do I avoid virtual fatigue, which Jared mentioned earlier on? How do we keep people engaged? What engagement strategies are we going to use? All of that requires a huge amount of planning and thinking, and I think we shouldn't overestimate that in the planning stage, and ensure that that's put into the timeline, because I think there was this perception you didn't need really to spend much time planning it. You could just schedule the event and off you went. And we've obviously learnt over the last few months that is not the case. Yeah, so that would be one of my top tips, is really, really carefully think about your planning and have the time to do that efficiently and effectively.
Those are really great points. And also, at the end of the day, you're still going to be coming up against the same regulatory and compliance issues that you had in the first place. So those timelines aren't going to change either.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, that's great. In our remaining time, I just wanted to let the audience know you're more than welcome to submit questions if you do have any for our panelists. I know we do have one that came in that's more of a general question that just says, can you briefly explain what the overtime format actually is? So I'm happy to take that question, and if either of you have any additional thoughts, but just when we're talking about an overtime setting, we're really talking about a platform where users can come, and in this case, like I said, I represent Within 3, and so we do offer an overtime platform that allows participants to access a web-based program where they would go on and clients would submit questions, where essentially we would be having a dialogue. We would have moderators that would focus on stimulating that discussion, and you would have advisors that would be answering questions, perhaps commenting on documents, which could be slide decks or publication developments. There's a myriad of different ways that you can utilize this. And then in some instances, there's opportunities for maybe one-way communications. I know, Jared, you had mentioned looking at ways of creating portals where maybe you can include access to different materials so that people can access these documents on demand. So for us, we offer something called a resource center, and it's a great way to access this content anytime, anywhere. Not sure if either of you have any other comments, but yeah, a lot of the examples that we've shared here today do take place, in an overtime asynchronous setting.
I think it's about having different touch points and acknowledging that for a particular event that you have, gone are the days where you would just interact on that single touch point. If you really want to extract some really good insights out of the audience or the panel that you're really interacting with, and that concept of overtime really, at least for me, highlights that there has to be thinking done ahead of an event, during an event, maybe between an event, and also after an event. So we're seeing a longer line of engagement than more of a static point in time. Yeah, which gets a little bit more value out of the interaction and more engagement out of the interaction as well.
And I think the beauty of the overtime platform as well is that you can go in at any point that's convenient for you. So you obviously set the time period. So for example, if we're setting a pre-read task or a pre-meeting discussion topic, we might set the days that has to be completed within, but it doesn't mean you must do it on Thursday at 3 o'clock. It means you do it within that time period when you have time in your calendar. So it allows that flexibility. And then the other beauty as well is if I go in and add some comments and I say, I'd really like to talk about overtime meeting formats, Jared could comment and say, great idea, Nichola. What I would also like to add is, can we do such and such and such and such? That helps us as planning the content for the meeting and planning the agenda for the meeting. We can start to see themes coming through and ideas from the different attendees. So it really starts to build that collaboration, that alignment between our attendees before they've even come to a meeting. Whereas if you were doing it face to face, often the first time they interact is when they sit round that table, and then you spend 15 minutes, maybe half an hour, introduction. Everybody gets to know each other. We've started some of that and understood common themes, common areas of interest before we've even started the official event, so to speak. So I think it provides, to Jared's point, this longer trajectory of an engagement and an interaction now that it's not just that finite meeting window that perhaps we've traditionally considered.
That's great. No, and I appreciate you both, putting that in broader context of what that looks like. So that's really helpful. And then, as far as just thinking ahead to 2021, and I know we've certainly covered, what congresses are looking like. Just curious, what is planning looking like, and what are ultimately some of the shifts or trends that you are seeing in your client discussions? Are there any new initiatives that you're seeing clients really want to tackle? Are they really trying to stick with, let us know what works and we're going to stick with that? Or people trying to go outside the box? And, when I think of this, I think just over the years of different, VR coming into play at conferences and gamification and people trying some of these newer things, or or people developing patient journeys and some of these more multimedia tactics. So just curious, what those conversations are shaping up for next year.
Jared, let's go.
Yeah, sure. I think the first thing to acknowledge is that, virtual engagement is really here to stay. The pandemic was certainly just an accelerator of that. We've never been in more of a digitally literate and dependent world. But on the same level, I think face-to-face has its own place. So our prediction is that the hybrid is going to be the way of the future. As Nichola said before, if that's how we're going to look at the overall plan. And then from a planning perspective, I think now that we know the situation that we're in, there's certainly no longer that need to have that knee-jerk reaction in terms of switching events to a virtual setting just for the sake of them happening. And some of our clients who are really good partners are looking at planning and engagement from a program level, whereby a particular team is now working a lot with their other teams to know, okay, you've got that set of webinars coming up here. You guys are going to target that Congress for then. Why don't we have more of an integrated approach so we don't fatigue our audience? And I think having that really integrated approach has been a mainstay of our planning for next year. No longer looking at how do you switch this or that, but rather how does it fit into the bigger scheme of things? And it goes back to that purpose that Nichola mentioned at the start. So, that's what we're really seeing. Having a really purpose-driven plan that integrates digital, being flexible for the possibility of face-to-face to happen maybe towards the end of next year. Right. But just being agile and taking more of a multi-channel and a multi-team approach, I'd say.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's a multi-channel with virtual and digital probably being at the core. In the past, it's been the face-to-face, perhaps, and some of the traditional communication methods and channels at the core, and the virtual and digital with the add-on nice to haves. And I think we're seeing the reverse of that now because we can't do some of the traditional approaches. So it's what can we do from a digital virtual perspective, and then if we're allowed to do other things later on, they'll become the add-on. So it's a truly integrated, to your point, Gerard. I think that's a key piece actually, is we have to be so mindful now of how we're communicating so that we're not tiring people with the same type of content, so being much more considered. And then looking at the way that we provide that content as well. So back to the other part of your question, Andrew, in terms of formats as well. I think people are looking for content in much more concise, bite-sized type formats. So shorter videos, certainly more visual, infographic formats as well. They want the information quick, rather than having to read through pages and pages of content. We were seeing that trend pre-COVID anyway. I think we've done a lot of research and seen that, certainly from a publication stakeholders perspective, that we've started to see that shift, but even more so now because people are, I suspect, getting fed up. This virtual fatigue concept is real now. So I think we have to be so mindful of providing that content. And then from any type of virtual engagement activity or a virtual meeting, it's looking at how we can integrate tools and activities to maintain that engagement throughout the meeting. So we're spending a fair amount of time thinking about how we can incorporate different technologies, different communication strategies. So it doesn't always have to be a technology that's the solution. It might be using a trained meeting facilitator, for example, to bring through the conversations. It might be the use of breakout groups. It might be how we provide meeting materials in advance. Can we do some as an e-learning format, or those sorts of things? So there's much more of that planned approach happening, and how we can dovetail one solution with another.
Absolutely. And one of my favorite clients is a very inspired and insightful man. He's got this way of looking at the long-term vision of, we've got so much available to us in terms of information, data, virtual type of materials, and how do you turn terabytes into sound bites to actually really get to the essence and the core of what we're trying to communicate. And so, as Nichola mentioned, the summaries, the distillation of information into a beautiful communicative way is really, really important going forward.
I love that. That's a great soundbite in and of itself. But yeah, no, I love that. and actually that feeds right into my last question that I have. And this doesn't necessarily need to be examples based on your own experience, but just, for just point of discussion, looking at this from a global perspective, I'm just curious if you could both comment on, do you see any opportunities for teams to really expand as they're working together internally, with their global counterparts? So whether it's, based in Europe with other European teams, or expanding to APAC or other regions, it's something that we come into within the US, where sometimes we do see a collaboration, with our EU counterparts. But we're just, curious to hear your thoughts and feelings about that, if you see any opportunities opening here where you're seeing greater collaboration there.
I think that's one of the beauties of virtual. I think it's made us so much more connected than perhaps we would have been in the past. So there's that ease of sharing knowledge, sharing information has changed as part of this pandemic. So I certainly see, from our perspective, better collaboration, and even from an internal Parexel perspective, we certainly share those learnings from our global teams regionally and down into countries, and we're implementing cascading programs where we may devise that at a global level, and then through the use of technology and being able to speak like this, being able to see people on camera, has been able to allow us to help and pass that knowledge on, help them implement activities in different regions and different markets. So I certainly see that it has helped to increase that collaboration, from perhaps a global to different regional levels, perhaps more so than if we'd have to bring everybody together in a face-to-face environment.
Absolutely.
And the beauty of that over time asynchronous type of platform means that time zone becomes less of a hurdle. In terms of collaborating transatlantically, or collaborating with APAC, suddenly now we have that opportunity to yeah, think more a little bit along the lines of a more of a coordinated global approach, and sharing best practices quite easy. The other thing is that because of the frequency of these types of events happening, it's, you know, as Nichola said, it's not necessarily easier, or it's not necessarily easier or less work to manage and create a virtual type of engagement and meeting, but these can certainly happen. These can certainly happen quicker and more often than a face-to-face meeting. So the learnings that we're getting we're learning at a quicker rate than we were before, is what I'm trying to say. And so those types of learnings are being transposed from region to region. It's easier now for someone in the US to dial in or attend a meeting in the EU if it's on a virtual platform, on their own time, when they can digest it with the materials at hand. It becomes a little bit more of a, yeah, I'd say a bit more of a collaborative approach.
Absolutely. And, you know, hopefully in addition to breaking down, you know, time barriers, we're breaking down language barriers as well with these overtime settings. You know, just greater ease of being able to translate right then and there. And so that's helpful as well. And again, really goes back into that share of voice that, you know, everybody has a seat at the table, no matter what language you're speaking, we can equalize that and you know, have some learnings and takeaways from that if we do want to delve into different regions and get feedback from different stakeholders. So I think that's great. Well, in our final minutes, just want to, if either of you have any final thoughts, I know we're coming up on the hour. This was really a great discussion. If either of you have any final thoughts to share, I greatly appreciate both of your times.
I think we've covered a huge amount, Angela, in the session. So I think the key top tips I would give, it would be about, don't underestimate the power of planning with these types of events, and really ask yourself the questions of how am I going to achieve this? What are my key meeting objectives or my event objectives? And then what's the appropriate tool that I can deliver these? And then back to that metrics discussion we had earlier around, am I giving value? Is this a valuable use of time for either the healthcare professional or the patient when we're asking them to participate and collaborate with us? And then a final point, and I think we've all agreed virtual's here to stay, which is great, actually. I think I would have been very nervous to have this conversation probably 12 months ago, but I think we've all been on this amazing learning trajectory and are so much more comfortable with this virtual environment now. So it's a great place to be.
Absolutely.
Yeah, digital literacy has skyrocketed during this year. It's fantastic. Yeah, and Nick, I think they're brilliant points. The only things I'd add to that are have a plan, take an integrated and multi-channel kind of approach, and consider the audience, be understanding of who they are and what they're dealing with as their primary job. And tailor solutions to accommodate that. And then the very last one would be turn terabytes into sound bites.
Very good.
I love it. I love it. Well, I think we can't find a better way to end our session. So thank you both again. Thank you everyone for joining us. I hope you were able to, you know, walk away with some great tips and recommendations, especially as you're planning for next year. So thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you for having us. It was a wonderful conversation.
Thanks so much, Angela. Jared.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.